The word to teach means to flirt or to tease. Kind of. They're related.
Welcome to Deep Thoughts on the Rocks, a conversation to uncover truth regarding language, philosophy, and theology.
Oh, that looks a lot more like a recording. Is happening. Cool.
So, Mike, you said that the best banner happens when you don't know that it's being recorded.
Yep. Yeah, we messed that up.
I know. It's hard for me to be subtle when I have a giant TV that shows what I'm doing.
That's true. It is easier. It is easier when your computer is not like facing the other people who are also on the podcast.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
60 inches diagonal.
55 actually,
Oh,
but close
enough.
enough.
Wow. Huh.
So, did you want to hear?
Oh, this is good content.
Did you want to hear a bit about my sunburn yesterday?
I do actually want to hear a
Okay.
little bit about your sunburn. It's fantastic.
Thank you. The flip flop made a nice little
Indeed.
classic. So I'm sitting on a beach, catching up with an old friend, and we start talking about moral relativism. They go to a
Sure.
college in Polycal, I think, and just philosophy professor taught them about relativism, but they used interesting language. So we were trying to get through defining terms and figuring out what do we actually think instead of, so it took 4 hours, and we were trying to stay in the shade, but the shade kept moving with the sun and the trees, and so we
Nice.
just kept chasing it, and I got a nasty burn. Those words, I'll just say quickly, those words that were used that I hadn't heard before is they talk about beliefs.
Okay.
Instead of saying my truth and your truth, they'll say it's my belief and your belief.
Sure. That's actually, that's at least more meaningful.
Yes. And then the other word was, let me think about it. Understanding.
Okay.
You can come to an understanding of something, but you can't know truth. You can only come to an understanding.
Okay.
That was when
That's
we had
where
to,
I would disagree.
So they're saying absolute truth exists, but
Yep.
we cannot know it in its fullness. And I had to think about that a while.
But could you come to true knowledge of it in part?
In part, yes.
Oh, okay.
Eventually, we got to that point, and I
would
felt
agree
good with that. That was at the end of the the end of the conversation 4 hours later, and I was like, okay, we made progress. I think at least we both have a better understanding of what each other think on the issue.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. Well, and at least that's tenable. The idea that you can't ever fully comprehend something. The big question for me comes in is the idea of, can you have any true knowledge of anything even in part, versus the idea that you can never actually have any true knowledge. You can only have a belief. They're
saying you cannot prove anything.
I only disagree with mathematics. You can only prove mathematics.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one that's a.
Yep. You can only prove effectively something that is a closed system that exists entirely beneath the mind, which means mathematics is the only thing that fits that. It's the only thing that is beneath our minds and is a closed system. So like rocks are beneath our minds, but they're not a closed system. Rocks you could still theoretically have more rocks, but mathematics is done. We can learn more and more about it, but mathematics cannot change.
Yeah.
Period. Only our understanding of it can change, but it's set. Rocks change.
And
change therefore they're not a closed system. So
interesting. Yeah, so like if we were talking about rape is wrong, that's a universal, everyone knows it's wrong, that is a truth, and they say, well, but some people in some cultures would not define something as rape even though we would. So is it really, can we really know that rape is wrong? And it would have been easier just to say, okay, go to the math example of 2 + 2 = 4.
Mm-hmm.
If someone says it equals 5, and then a true relativist response would be, well, some people think it's 5, some people think it's 4, so we can't really know.
That would be a relativist position, not necessarily the only relativist position, but it is a relativist position. That's one specific kind of relativism, which is the idea that all truth is relative, which is not necessarily all relativism.
Okay.
You can be a relativist in areas. Okay. It's interesting. So Aquinas is a relativist in some ways. in morality. When he gets to morality, he does define that certain actions can be good or bad relative to circumstances.
Yes,
So
or
he does relate things. Or
intent.
which is subjectivism. So Aquinas is object, intention, circumstance. That's the objective, subjective, and relative view.
Oh,
all
cool.
three have to be at non-evil for the act to be non-evil.
So neutral or good.
Yep.
Yes.
And
The
that's
object
where
is the part that people miss the most, I think.
object is the one that is argued the most,
Yeah.
because that's the idea that regardless of perspective, a certain thing can always be wrong forever. That's
Yeah.
the one that people object to most of the time. But I think it's important to, and this is something that I was just listening to Peter Kraft explain it, and it kind of opened my eyes to, because like object, intention, circumstance, to me, when I was taught it in high school, I liked it, I subscribed to it, but I would say I didn't know if I would not have been able to like tell someone why I thought that was good, or even understand why it's important that every action can be understood in those three terms, until like a month ago when someone said, well, there are three ways to view reality: objective, subjective, and relative. And Aquinas's morality covers all three. He says it doesn't matter how you look at the act must not be evil in every way that you could possibly look at it for it to not be evil.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that actually, now suddenly that took the theory into practice, and I was suddenly able to really I could approach the theory much more easily. Incredible. I think Peter Kraft is incredible every time he talks about Aquinas. But I think, though, when he specifically talked about here's how Aquinas views law and morality, I thought it was one of the most eye-opening things I had ever heard.
Is that a video?
It was an audiobook called
Okay.
The Philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas by Peter Kraft.
I would love to listen to that.
It's phenomenal. I am going to re-listen to it again for when I go to... So in my Intro to Philosophy course this fall, when I'm teaching the morality section, I'm gonna re-listen to Peter Kraft while I'm building that unit big time,
great.
because I thought he does such a good job of... One of the problems with Intro to Philosophy is you have to try and cover everything correctly without actually covering anything well because you don't have time. One semester is not enough time to actually know much of anything. My Intro to Philosophy class's point is, by the end of the semester, I want students to be inspired to continue to seek truth. But I want to give them a good foundation. Ways that here are ways to test whether or not your conclusions are aligning with truth or not. And so I want to give them a taste of here's what metaphysics is like. Here's what morality is like. Here's what ethics is like. Here's what art is like. And give them solid foundations, ways of thinking about things that can lead them as they continue. My ultimate goal is to teach more than just intro, to teach all kinds of philosophy courses. One of the other things I want to give them is a resources sheet. Just be like, if you're interested in this, here's some really good stuff. If you're interested in this, here's some good stuff. There are bad authors on every topic. I forget whose law it is. 90% of everything is crap. It's one of my favorite quotes of all time. I forget who came up with that. I need to remember. It's such and such person's law is what it's sort of jokingly called. But unfortunately, the two best authors in philosophy are hard to read, especially for high schoolers who haven't been taught a lot of philosophy. Plato and Aquinas are so hard to read if you don't know how they're talking.
Yeah.
So yeah,
There aren't that many terms you need to learn for Aquinas to make sense of his stuff.
I would
right?
argue Aquinas has more terms than Plato.
Oh, okay.
Partly because Plato goes about defining terms. That's a lot of what he does. Aquinas works with terms.
Yeah.
And you can read Aquinas and get a gist of what he's saying, but you will miss the important distinctions if you don't know what he means specifically by certain words. So if you read through his description of the soul and you don't know what he means by phantasm, you'll get a gist of what he means by soul. You won't be able to answer the question of how does the intellectual, non-corporeal soul interact with the brain. You will not be able to answer that question with any sort of confidence unless you understand phantasm in a way that the English word phantasm 100% never means in modern parlance. So, yeah, I would say with Aquinas, there's a reason that you can buy an Aquinas dictionary.
I didn't know
which
that.
is this thick. It's like an inch thick, and it's all the words. And it's because even words, most of it's not even words that he made a specific meaning for. It's just he lived 800 years ago. No one talks like he does anymore. Yeah. Even philosophers don't talk like he does anymore. It's been 800 years. The only philosophers that would remotely be talking like him are Thomists. And even then, Thomism didn't stop with Thomas. Thomism has progressed for 800 years. Thomists think very differently than Aquinas on several issues and in several ways.
They'd have to with the...
They'd have to with certain things that he just was objectively wrong about, and we can go back and we can say that. For various reasons, he's wrong about several things, and I don't want to just start spewing, here's the ways Aquinas is wrong. That's not this episode.
You know what I noticed? We're really bad at banter. We pretty much just went into a side topic of... that was mostly my fault.
That's true. We were just talking about your sunburn. Your sunburn.
So the 90% is crap thing came to mind for me when I was looking up remedies for sunburns.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
A lot of them scared me. I'll be honest. So I'm at my grandparents right after I got the burn, and no aloe vera. So that they said, well, we have some calamine lotion or something that'll help soothe the pain. And I don't care too much about the pain, but they insisted, so I went through with it. Turns out that bottle though was so old that the gel or the lotion in it was sticky.
Yeah.
The kind of sticky that like hurts. You can't get off. So I come home and it's just caked onto my arms. Not dry though, not like hardened caked, but like sticky caked into my hair and my arms and my legs. And so I was like trying to wash it off with soap, and soap would not cut through the sticky. It's just there.
Gosh.
So I'm having to like be rough with this tender sunburn. And then I was just like, what gets rid of sticky lotion? One random Google search on my phone. Apparently isopropyl alcohol was kind of doing that, but that is not very kind to your skin either.
Oh my gosh, no.
So that made it a little worse, probably.
Yeah.
And then the weird one that I found that was suggested by some registered nurse,
perfect
medical official opinion, was soaking sunburns in black tea.
I've heard of that.
They said the tannins will correct the pH imbalance that is present on your skin when you get burned. I didn't know pH was a deal with sunburns, but...
I mean, I wouldn't be the only thing I do.
Oh, right.
Certainly. I'm skeptical of anything that relegates all health to a pH scale. Not that that's what they were claiming, but I know that there are health philosophies that are basically just like, you need to make your body as basic as possible.
Okay.
Which is hilarious because blood is naturally acidic. And if you make your blood naturally basic, you will die.
Well, there you go.
So it also turns out, so usually it's eat certain foods that make you more alkaline than acidic. The problem is your diet can only affect your body's overall pH by like 0.2.
Whoa.
Max. And that's like, not you, but like maximum 0.2. And that's a crazy amount of eating like baking soda or something. Like it has to be you are eating super basic things.
So like bathing in a lemon juice bath would change your pH?
No, not very much because that's all outside of you.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
But drinking only lemon juice for a day might make you like 0.1 or 0.2 more acidic.
Wow.
Your body's just really good at not getting screwed up in acidity. Turns out your body's really good at not being as stupid as you are. with your health.
Yeah.
Like, that's a great moment.
Yeah, so after reading all of these various things that I could have tried, I actually tested the tea thing, but not well enough. I bet you're supposed to soak for like 30 minutes. And I put a little tea on a spot to just be the scientific method of like, I'll just see in the morning if it's any better there or not.
Oh, sure.
No change.
No.
if listener land was on the edge of their seats on that one.
Yeah.
But no, I did kind of conclude, you know what? My body is just going to take care of this on its own, and I'll just kind of put up with it in the meantime.
Yeah, the best thing to do is to keep it from drying out. That's like your number one.
I heard,
your body heals in a wet environment.
Water
best.
is life. Yeah.
That's what. That's why. That's like the main reason for Band-Aids. It's. I mean, other than it holds, there's a little bit of pressure, but Neosporin is antibacterial, but it's also wet, and so you put Neosporin on it and hold it there, and it keeps it moist.
Okay.
And your body can heal. That's why if you keep a wound, if you let a wound scab over, you will probably get a scar if it's big enough. Because a scab keeps moisture in, but it also, everywhere the scab is touching is dry. And so that part heals worse. Whereas if you keep Neosporin on it, it actually will stop a scab from forming. But it also keeps it moist, and you will much less likely to scar over if you keep it wet.
Wow. Well, if we haven't turned the stomachs of the audience yet, do we want to get into the topic?
Sure. We kind of approached the topic a little bit when you were talking.
Right up to the edge.
Yeah. I can't remember which you were talking. You were talking about terms and stuff like that and what belief means. And I mentioned something like phantasm. And the way Aquinas uses the word phantasm is nothing like the common English use of phantasm. And what I wanted to talk about today was the relationship between language and thought. And just sort of explore that a little bit. And I wrote it down as a series of questions that I'm going to pose to you and see what you think.
And you were glancing at, we didn't mention yet, but Joey is not here today. In his place, we have Max.
Hello.
Oh, that was really... get right up on the mic.
Right up on the
Oh,
mic?
yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like
Okay.
right up here.
Don't be
Like,
shy.
you can hear the difference between how loud you are and how loud I am.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yes. But I tend to be super loud.
Also true.
Thank you. Here's what... the first question is just, what is the relationship between language and thought? If someone asked you this wildly philosophical question on the street, they just run up to you, stay 6 feet away, and then shake you proverbially and say, what is the relationship between language and thought? What would you say?
So I have to have like a knee-jerk response.
Sure.
The difference between language and thought.
The relationship between
language and thought.
Which you can define as a difference, but I just want... My question is relationship. You can say they have no relationship, they're utterly different. That's totally fine.
Knee-jerk, I'm going to go with that.
Okay, that language and thought have no relationship. They are fundamentally different.
Yes.
And fundamentally separate.
Yes.
Okay.
But we need to define what language is, obviously, and thought, and yeah.
I mean, sure. Yes, we can get to that. What's your knee-jerk reaction?
Well, I'd say if you don't have the language to describe your thought, then you don't really have thought, then really. Like, if you're trying to explain everything to someone and you can't, then I guess something along that lines.
Okay. So you're, correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but you're saying something along the lines of, to consider something to be a fully formed thought requires the ability to express it to another.
That's good language.
I
was
guess-
thinking of communicate, but yeah, I like express.
I guess to a degree, yeah.
Okay. Cool. You both have different opinions than I do, which is good on the influence between language and thought.
On the variety show of Deep Thoughts on the Rock.
Yeah, indeed. I'm interested first in yours, where you said they have no relationship. Can you talk more about that just a little bit?
Yes. Oh boy. Well, I was only going off of, again, it was a knee jerk. So
sure.
I was going off of something 100%. That recently happened. Which was that I tried to start, I'm learning a new language, Italian, and I tried thinking in Italian because one of my language coaches advised me to do that.
Yes.
And so I tried it, and it worked pretty well. And it was still my thoughts. And so I thought, wow, my thoughts are not tied to or dependent on a language.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, I feel like the new language I'm learning, I'm just learning a lot more vocab, a little bit of syntax change of how
Mm-hmm.
the grammar, how the language works, and ordering of things and thoughts in a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess language could maybe order the way you think, right?
This is your opinion.
That's what
I'm not going to correct you on your opinion.
I think I'm just kind of concluding right now is that language could maybe order the way you have a thought, but
Okay.
the thought itself wouldn't have to be any different.
Okay. So it sounds like you're saying they are independent, if not entirely separate.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a response to that? Because yours seemed more like there was a dependence rather than just being
So I guess
completely
I was
independent.
going more less like specific language like English or Italian, and more with just like the language and your like what words you can use to describe. So
Sure.
I guess I'm going more broad
Okay.
than
Language in general as opposed to each specific language.
right.
Okay.
Oh, so if you did not have any language at all, is that what you're thinking, Max?
Yeah, we could go there.
If
So
you
like if
didn't
you don't
have
have
a
a
language-
language, what would your thoughts be?
That's
How-
a really interesting question that is way beyond my scope of knowledge. What I can say is, one, it's very hard to find a human that doesn't have language. They only happen because of a tragedy. Like, the only humans that don't have language are humans that literally grew up without humans around them, which is always a tragedy. They are all very different from each other. All the different cases of quote unquote, they're called quote unquote feral children. They happen for various reasons. The studies are inconclusive. It's very hard to communicate with them because you don't have a language that you can communicate to them with. The other problem is all of them tend to not live very long after they're found, and they're living with humans now. There's one of them that I don't remember the name of, but I'm sure you can look it up somewhere, that never learned how to use a language. Lived around humans long enough, they were trying to teach her how to speak, and she never really learned how to speak. It is not clear, for obvious reasons, what she was thinking all the time because she couldn't express it. So it's unclear whether or not was she having as complex of thoughts as a quote unquote normal person with language at her age would have been having, or were her thoughts somehow inhibited by the inability to use language. It's not clear because we couldn't ask her.
We can't try that ourselves. Like, try to have a thought without using words in your head.
Well, that becomes a question. Can you have a thought that is not expressed in words?
And yeah, actually, I think maybe you could.
I 100% think you can, but I have a horse in the race for that.
Oh, okay. I think you can, because you can think about an object without remembering what it's called.
That's true, but are you just remembering qualities that you could describe in language?
I don't know.
I know, you're right. It's a very, very interesting question.
Sometimes no. Maybe not. Not in the moment that you're thinking of all the qualities to describe it. You have the thought. It's like that. It's virtually present in your mind. Something that you saw or something that you heard.
So you're claiming that you can have an image in your mind that is not tied to words.
Yeah. I find this in music a lot, actually. Sure. When I'm trying to write a song, I do not have the skills to the knowledge of chords and chord progressions. Mm-hmm. I know what I would like it to sound like, but I don't know how to recreate it on an instrument. And yet it's a thought in my head, and I have no way of expressing it.
That's fair. That goes into an even deeper question of, is it possible to express that thought in language? As a question in the void. Yes, right, because every chord you can play on a guitar can be expressed.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a certain sense, it's not that you're having a thought that's not tied to language. It's that you don't have the vocabulary to describe it, but it's still a thought that is linguistically describable, which is an interesting question itself. I would say, in a certain sense, I can think of something and not have a word for it, which means that I can have a thought independent of my language, which is sort of what Max was talking about. I can think of several neat words in several languages for concepts that my native language does not have a single word for. The opposite of a virgin. There is no word that literally just means the exact opposite of a virgin in English. There's no word necessarily for what's a good one? Abstract nouns might be cheating a little bit because every abstract noun scopes a little bit differently. I'm trying to think of concrete. I can think of several neat Greek words, but I know how to explain what they mean in English. Oh, I know a good one. Hesychasm. Hesychasm is a word that is not from English, and I doubt the average English speaker, if I told them the word hesychasm, even if I explained exactly what it was, I bet they would go, I still do not know exactly what you're talking about. But I can think about it. Is the reason I can think about it because I have language to express it.
You've really piqued my interest. I had no idea what you're talking
about. In hesychasm?
Yeah.
My goal is to pique everyone's interest in hesychasm because it's amazing. Hesychasm is something that you find in the Eastern Christian traditions. It is the primary form of meditation that Eastern Christian monks use. Hesychasm is Greek for silence. The point of hesychasm is to free the mind from attachment to the world, so much so that the mind can have direct experience of God, unmediated through thought or language, which is interesting.
Wow, yeah.
It is sometimes described as seeing the divine light. So, to put it into Western terms, it would be the equivalent of experiencing the beatific vision.
Okay. In
some limited way before death, like while still living on Earth. That is the goal of hesychasm. But the whole premise of hesychasm is that you can have direct experience in your mind of something that cannot be expressed in words. Not just something you don't have vocabulary for, but the idea that you could have direct experience of the divine, of God, in an inexpressible way, in a way that no language ever, it's beyond the scope of language, not just the scope of a language. And that whole claim would fall apart if humans cannot have a thought that is inexpressible in language, which would be interesting. So in that sense, there are some traditions that, certainly there are people who claim that thought can be so independent of language as to surpass the ability to even have a relationship to language. Not everyone thinks that, certainly. I would say most of the scholastic West would not have accepted that for a long time. Whether or not they do now is a totally open question. But the average scholastic Western theologian would have denied the ability to have direct experience of God in that way before dying. Or at least that it was possible to attain in a way that's seekable, worth seeking to have. The idea that you could have that would be a totally free gift, and there's nothing you can do to even like make it easier to receive. The average one. Aquinas would have disagreed, and this is a way in which Aquinas is not the one person whose views are everything scholasticism was, because he would agree actually that hesychasm was possible.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so I would say in some places it seems like there are some what I would be totally comfortable calling fringe cases where thought can be so independent of language as to surpass even the ability to have a relationship to language. Average thought, I'm more skeptical about. And that's where I want to go with this. Does thought determine language? or does language determine thought? I think your answer is going to be no. Or, well, no is not one of the... I think based on your previous definitions, it sounds more like you would say that... Oh, see, now I don't know. I don't want to put words into your head. Or words into your mouth. So I guess I'll just ask you, do you think it's more accurate to say that language determines thought or that thought determines language? Or do you completely reject any of that language? Whichever of you. I don't care who answers first.
Huh. I was under the assumption that you said language determines thought or thought determines language.
Yeah, if we're gonna if you were given those two sentences and someone said pick one or both or neither, and then we can discuss,
Right.
deeper.
Yeah, I would say thought determines language.
Okay. What would your thoughts be, Max?
It'd be kind of hard because once you start getting into language, you start getting into culture then,
Sure.
right? And cultures inherently are going to have different ideas about different topics.
Mm-hmm.
So I think language can determine thought. But at the same time, there's definitely, I think, some things that thought can determine. The way you think can be completely different from your specific language, such as English or Italian again. So I think there's instances that both could exist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you have further thoughts? He says maybe a mix of both. You fell strongly towards one.
Thank you for the summary. I've been kind of spacing out this afternoon. Maybe I'm tired or
Perfect.
something.
Yeah, well, you're good.
Yeah, I don't think that language determines thought.
At all.
I don't think so.
Okay. I have a question then, not that I disagree. You and your friend that you were talking about earlier had a discussion where you were defining terms. Why? Why were you defining terms? Why were you basing your thoughts on you have these English words and somehow you want to frame your thoughts around shared understandings of these English words? Why not just establish agreement in thought and apply a random word afterwards?
Oh, because we had to establish agreement in thought through language.
Okay.
We had to use language as a tool.
Cool.
Right.
Could you have done it without, so if you're trying to define, we think there's a difference between belief and understanding and thought, maybe, or belief, understanding, and truth.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that there are those three categories? Rather than come up with the arbitrary number of categories there are and then apply English words. To me, it sounds like you began with, we have three words, therefore we must have three categories. Now we just have to agree what those three categories really are.
Mm-hmm.
But why are we describing three as our number of categories? Because we have three words.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just interested in your response.
I'm not sure.
Okay, good. That's the best response.
Okay, thanks.
That was my best sophistical question was, but you began with these. And this is where I'm going to say, I think that maybe determine might be an interesting word. You say that you think, or at least you have said previously now, that you say language does not determine thought. Would you agree to language influences thought?
I was thinking no.
Okay.
I was really thinking that we have thoughts and we use the tool of language to express those thoughts.
Sure.
But that tool doesn't wag the dog. The tail doesn't wag the dog wags the tail.
Sure.
Kind of a thing.
Yeah. Would you still agree to that? You said you were thinking it. Is that your way of thinking?
I'm saying right now I am open to changing my opinion because you are kind of you're not done with everything you have to say on it yet.
That's fair. I'm just interested. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's an interesting question because I think what ends up happening is we work, our whole lives are lived through language, basically. And I think it's interesting if you have to describe what you think about food. So I was describing, when we were eating goji berries earlier.
Yeah.
And we were eating them, we're trying to think, what does this taste like?
Yeah.
That's not a thought. A question is not the same as a thought. If we want to say, I'm thinking thought means you've formed an image. You have an actual something in your brain that you've created a form in your brain. Questioning what the form is an approach to thought, but it isn't quite the thought yet.
Right.
And so while we're still trying to form our thought on what a goji berry eats, what it tastes like, not what it eats. Berries are not carnivores. It was interesting to me because we started using language immediately. We just started naming things that were not goji berries to describe what we were experiencing.
Well, I would say I was remembering experiences and then using language to describe. I had the thought of the taste of a raisin,
sure,
but I didn't need the word raisin to have the thought. I needed the word raisin to communicate that thought to you.
Yes, and I think that is an example of your thought determining language. I'm interested in what your experience of when I said black tea was me saying those words and you hearing those words. Was that an instance of language clarifying what you were thinking?
Okay.
Or not? And I mean, that's my question is, would you have recognized that flavor as one of the distinct flavors without the words black tea in your head? Maybe yes, maybe not. I'm interested in your personal. I have another story where I have an example of myself.
This is great. Yeah, so no, I did not pick up on that until it was mentioned to me. But what I meant by language being separate is that
sure,
you said black tea, and I knew what you meant by that. But you could have used a different word if I knew a different word that still meant what black tea is.
Certainly, yes. And
so
that's where
my mind immediately went to it has that bitter tannins like black tea has.
Yeah.
So I was thinking of the word tannins when you said black tea, but
sure.
But yeah.
Yeah, and if I had said tannins, it would have helped solidify.
And then I would have been thinking about black tea.
Yep, it doesn't matter.
Wine, but yeah.
In a certain sense, it doesn't matter which word I use. That's already that makes the association. But it was the act of using a word.
Right.
A word that has that association, because there's all kinds of words I can use to describe the flavor of black tea. Black tea just happens to be one of the most obvious ones, because that's sort of the umbrella term. But I could have said tannins. I could have said tea. I could have said vegetal. I mean, I could have used a lot of words. But I think it's interesting. There's a specific coffee that I really enjoy that I don't have any idea how to get a hold of now, because the place that I got it from doesn't exist anymore. And sometimes when I'm tasting coffee, I get it tastes, quote, fruity. And that's as specific as I ever get, because sometimes you don't make the associations to words. But there was one coffee that I was tasting one time, and it was just, there was some flavor that I could not pinpoint. It was like when there's a word for something. There's a perfect word to finish your thought. You're expressing something and you're there's a word for this, and I can't think of it. Mm-hmm. And in a certain sense, I'm inhibited from really I have a more vague idea of what I'm trying to say if I don't have a word for it, in a sense.
So you're saying words do influence your thought because it helps solidify the thought? I'm
saying I think there is at least a way in which words can. And there's this coffee. I'll get to you in 2 seconds. There's this coffee that has one of the flavors of it is the smell and flavor being really similar. It's the smell of sycamore tree leaves in the fall that have been on the ground for about 2 days. It's so wildly specific. And because I had an experience of it being I grew up with a sycamore tree in my backyard. So sycamore and all of its different smells throughout the year are very ingrained in my childhood. The fact that I knew that smell so well, but I could not think of what it was until finally I got the word sycamore. Somehow, and it took me about an hour. I was tasting this coffee for an hour before I got to that. And once I said it, once I had the word, not necessarily said it out loud, but once I had the word sycamore in my head, I could immediately parse the smell and categorize it and put it in my brain and say, that's what this smells like. Until I had that word, there was something not cohesive about my thought about the coffee.
Yeah.
There was an experience of thought that wasn't yet solidified, and language actually helped change the way I thought about the coffee.
And so that's called the tip of the tongue syndrome.
Yes, that's one way of putting it.
Yeah, I thought, okay, my counter to that was going to be that I would say you were frustrated that you weren't able to communicate it, but that didn't change whether you had the thought or not. But after what you just said, I think you're right.
Yeah.
The words can help make the connection in your brain to other experiences. That without the word, there's no connection.
Yeah, and I think you just touched on something important. It's in the brain. I would argue your soul, your intellect, does not need language.
Okay.
But the brain, the mind that it's acting on, the physical part of the brain, language 100% is helping facilitate that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Whereas I think I would agree there are ways in which thought is completely independent of language. And I think that's where thoughts that are proper to the intellect, and by proper I mean they happen in the intellect by power of the intellect, solely by the power of the intellect does that without need of anything else. I would argue those clearly have to happen outside of language, because language is a physical thing, and if your soul is not physical, then things that are proper to the soul also have to be non-physical, therefore not language. This goes into Aquinas' idea of how do angels communicate to each other, and he says it can't be by language because language is a material thing.
Right, and they have no material.
They are strictly non-material.
Immaterial.
But I think when I did coffee tasting classes, because I'm so cultured, that I ran coffee tasting classes, which is something you can only have coffee tasting classes in a first world country that is also fairly cushy even for a first world country, I think. But we would do these classes and we would do the same thing. We would all sit down with a coffee and we would start smelling it and tasting it. And so we would brew it in our mugs. We would taste it over and over and things like that. And I was teaching them, in a sense, the approach. How do you get into a coffee? How do you enter into this strange world of people saying, well, this coffee tastes like grapes. And you're like, no coffee tastes like grapes. Fundamentally, it just does not. There are notes of grapes. There are reminders of grapes in coffee. No coffee just actually tastes like grapes unless you've messed up your coffee horribly. But one of the best things I would do is I would taste something. I had always tasted the coffees beforehand. I was never tasting a coffee for the first time. But that didn't mean that I didn't learn more. Every time you taste a coffee, you can get more. Sometimes you don't, sometimes you do. It just depends. And I would sit there and I would say, okay, what is everyone getting? And I would just let them start saying words and just see what happens. And some coffees, I would be like, I'm just really actually very interested because I got fruity and I'm still working on what I think it smells like and tastes like. And sometimes they would just get it and I would go, yes. But sometimes I would have a very specific word in my mind because it's a unique thing. Something like olive or beef or like one of those weird fruits. Or sometimes I think it's got a really distinctive fruity
berries.
Goji berry. I think it's got a really distinctive fruitiness of a specific fruit. And what I'm hearing them say is things like fruity. And I'd be like, what kind? Do we think it's more of a dried fruit or a fresh fruit? Like just trying to draw it out. And sometimes those can be leading questions. And that's another way we can talk about leading questions as influencing thought. But sometimes I'd be like, okay, I'm going to say a word. And I want you all to just react. Kind of yes or no. And I would just look at them all and go, pineapple. And it would be interesting to see which of the people went, yes. And some people who went, Maybe. And some people would just be like, no, I'm not getting any pineapple, which is valid. I mean, a coffee does or does not have a note in it, but your tongue and your nose might pick up differently. And so some people would be 100% with me. They'd be like, yes, pineapple. And it was interesting because it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. Mm-hmm. Once you hear it, once they heard the word pineapple, they could not untaste the pineapple.
Yeah.
And that's a way in which I think language influences thought. Once I said pineapple, they could not taste it as not pineapple. They could get more specific, but they, in a sense, would have to fight against their own senses and their own associations to taste it as anything other than pineapple. And, more specific, but to taste it as not pineapple was going to be very difficult. It's kind of the idea of pictures on the internet or something like that where it says, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah, same thing. It's like, same with like music. We were talking earlier, and like, once you hear this clap track, then it's like, you're never going to be able to not tell that it's a clap track.
Right.
Right.
And yeah, to explain what you're talking about is, an album was recorded in a tiny venue with just a few audience members sitting in, like family members, and then they put on a massive audience clapping track to make it sound like a huge live recording. Yeah, and it wrecked it for me once I found out, because then I knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas before, if no one said anything, I would have never even questioned it. My attention wasn't drawn to, is that a pre-recorded clapping track, or is that just an actual audience?
Mm-hmm. And in a sense, it doesn't mean that if you had never heard the words clap track, it would still have the track. It would still have the clap track. It wouldn't be a change in reality. Mm-hmm. But it would be a change in your thoughts, in the way that your mind is conforming itself to reality. Something I just thought of, and I don't have it written down anywhere, is the idea of leading questions.
Yeah.
This is one of the really important things. Not to bring this into a really, really heavy subject, but what I immediately think of is the idea of if something traumatic may be happening to a child in their home, it's important. Part of what they're going to do, obviously you don't just wildly accuse people of doing things, but when the police come in, they don't ask the child questions like, does your father hit you? Like, you don't ask that kind of a question, because you are guiding that child's thoughts by doing that. You are no longer getting an unbiased answer, because you don't know what they're interpreting that question as meaning. Mm-hmm. Like, or just things like that. You just ask them very open, and you try to use as vague of language as possible, and you try to get them to speak and to get them to express the thoughts, to get them talking in their own words to describe what's going on.
And the opposite of that is used all the time in a courtroom to get a confession out of someone, right? To
get a confession, or to influence a jury. Yeah. Even if the person doesn't answer your questions, you are influencing the jury's thoughts by controlling what language is being used to describe what situations. And in a sense, if language is being used. If you ask a very leading question, even if the other lawyer objects and the question is thrown out, the jury cannot forget, in a sense. They can dismiss it as evidence, but reality will not change. They were in a room where the defendant did not answer a very leading question.
Yeah, so
whatsoever that means.
If someone were making accusations at one of you or something like that, if I'm in a social situation and someone's making lots of accusations towards a person that are scary things, I would be a little more cautious around that person than anyone else. And there's no reason to be, because they were just is that a way of like a leading, not really a question, but
not necessarily, but that might be more something like a person's actions influencing. I mean, their action is language, but I don't know if it's it's not
really the words.
It's
right?
not the fact that they're using language in a sense. Which, I mean, to be fair, a leading question is not just the fact that you're using language, but it is a way that the specific way you are using language is done in a way that influences other people's thoughts. That one, I could see an argument of someone just saying it's not necessarily that they're using language in a specific way. It's that they're acting with a particular intent. Whether that intent was within language or not, you would still have a similar reaction.
Okay, yeah.
If someone's really aggressive, whether or not they're aggressive in language or aggressive with their body, I could see an argument to say you're reacting to aggression. It's not important whether or not it was done with language or not.
I don't know if I explained myself the situation I was thinking of.
That could be.
The lawyer in the courtroom,
yes,
making those accusational leading questions of, you did this, didn't you? That's the stuff the jury can't unhear, even though it was wildly untrue.
Yes.
But they know that someone thinks it, at least because he voiced it.
Sure. I will say the jury also knows it's that lawyer's job to try and get the defendant to confess.
Yeah.
In one sense. So I think that's a way where the lawyer has to be very careful. Are they going to alienate the jury by being wildly accusatory?
Yeah.
Or are they going to gain at least the jury's sympathy by asking what seems to be a reasonable question that never gets answered? It depends how you word it. I can word the same sentence in a wildly accusatory way, or I can make it sound like a very reasonable question. It's going to be received very differently, even if I'm asking for the exact same information. And so in a sense, that's emotional manipulation is what it is. So, and manipulation being a neutral term in that instance. Because I am controlling how I'm saying something, and I'm controlling the emotional impact it's going to have.
Is that one of the classes that lawyers take to become a lawyer?
I didn't take.
Yeah.
I didn't take. I've never been to law school.
Yeah.
I just know it is.
Probably it's just called psychology, but
it could just be a rhetoric class.
Yeah.
I would put that under. That's one of the higher levels of rhetoric. There's emotional manipulation, which always sounds like it's malicious. You can emotionally manipulate in a non-malicious way. It's possible. Mm-hmm. Like if a child gets a boo-boo, and you're like, it's not really that bad. They're crying more because it was surprising than it actually hurts. Mm-hmm. You can speak to that child in a way that seems very concerned about the wound, quote unquote wound, which is really just a boo-boo, or you can totally dismiss it. You are, in a sense, emotionally manipulating by modeling whether or not that child should or should not care. And because children are very sponge-like, they're going to be influenced by that. Yeah. Now, you're doing it in a positive way because you're trying to model to the child whether or not this wound in reality should or should not be cared about that much. But yeah, that's teaching. Teaching is, in a sense, just positive. I love this
manipulation.
Positive manipulation, in a sense, is part of teaching, and it's and that sounds really bad, but I don't think it's. I think it's an unavoidable way to look at it. I had a discussion, and I don't want to bog this down, but I had a discussion with someone who said they hated brainwashing. And I asked them to define their term. What do you mean by brainwashing? We got it down. Their idea of what brainwashing was, generally, what it ended up boiling down to was someone teaching people ideas that person disagreed with. Because really, that's what brainwashing is. Now, you can include malicious intent and things like that, and I would include. I don't think you can brainwash unmaliciously. I think if you're teaching someone something wrong, but you're not being malicious about it, I don't think you're brainwashing them. I would reserve the term for malicious intent. But basically, their idea of what brainwashing was boiled down to what I would call teaching.
Yeah.
Basically, and it was because they were talking about, like, you're only presenting part of the truth. And I was like, yes, because you have to. You can never express the full truth of something that's not mathematical. You are always picking what to explain. Like when I'm teaching Latin, I have never taught anyone in the world everything about Latin.
So really, you're just imposing your beliefs on
another
person.
Yeah, and I'm explaining things the way I understand them. And I'm trying to explain them in ways that I think will be the best way to view them, but I am controlling how those students view the dative case. by telling them it works like this. You could describe the way the dative case works in about 100 different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving them one. I am radically controlling their viewpoint of how something works because it's confusing. And then as time goes on, I loosen up and I say, yeah, remember how I said the dative means this? Yes, but it's broader than that.
Yes,
Yeah.
but
And we move on.
see that all the time.
And yeah, because that's what teaching is. You start
Especially
by
when it's a
introducing
very
something.
complex thing.
Yeah, and you're trying to lead them towards truth, but you have to start. The starting point of a journey is necessarily further away from the end than any other part on the journey.
because then it wouldn't be a journey.
Right. So the first thing you teach someone about, it's like when we teach small children that Columbus discovered the Americas. That's not wrong. It's just wildly not the whole story. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean it's a lie to tell people Columbus discovered America. He did.
And
He's just not the only one or the first one.
And it doesn't mean that it's acceptable. Well, I want to be careful with my words here, but for someone else to have a belief that Columbus did not discover the Americas.
Yeah, I think that's wrong. Depending how you, I mean, if by discover they mean be the first person there,
Yeah.
sure. That leads into my next question. No one talks like that. No one uses the word discover. Generally, the word discover in English generally is much looser than first person ever to see it. We are way, way, way looser with that word in general.
Sorry, I'm finding it funny we're bringing up Columbus again, which we've both agreed that we don't have a lot of knowledge on.
That's super
the
true.
history of Columbus and the discovery of the New World.
Yes. But when we use the word discover, like when I say something like, I discovered a new band,
That's exactly what I was thinking.
100% not the first person that knew about that band.
Yeah.
The band knew about them. Their producer knew.
But that would mean that we all have discovered the Americas.
Yes, it does mean that.
Oh, wow.
It does, in a way, because there is a sense of the word discover that means to find out for the first time, regardless of how many people have found out before you. And that is an actual sense of the word discover used in modern English. The question then becomes, is that an actual, should we use the word discover? Like, should the way we use words in English affect the way we think about concepts? Should I use the word discover to mean I find out the first time? Or the first time anything ever is known by any humans ever? Those are very, very different things. Is it okay that we use the same word for both? Or, as philosophically minded people, ought we use different terms for different things every time? And then the follow-up question to that is, if not, if it's okay to use some usage, how far? Because I can think of lots of words that have very, very, very broad uses. And does that mean that those are tied? So it's a question. Like, when I first hear about a band, and when the first human ever stepped foot on the continents called the Americas now, is it right to use the same word? And even if it's okay to use the same word or not, are those related concepts? Are those even related ideas?
No, because you wouldn't get a holiday named after your discovery of a band.
Sure, but neither does the first person who ever stepped foot in the Americas.
Yeah.
There is no holiday commemorating that. But my question is, are those even related ideas? Clearly, they're not the same idea. Are they related at all? Big pregnant pause.
Well,
No, it's a thought. It's a
yeah,
real
I
question.
see a relationship
Okay.
that there's like information that's learned.
Okay.
And
that's
then the
fair.
question is, has it been ever learned by anyone? Or is it just you?
Gotcha.
So
Yeah, and
I mean, yeah.
yeah.
like-
So you're saying there is a relationship because they're both forms of acquisition of knowledge.
yeah.
I'm assuming that you're comfortable
Yeah,
with that.
I can. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do other languages have different words for those two things?
I have no idea. I've never
Yeah.
encountered a language where you could not use the same word for those two things. but my knowledge of languages is very, very small compared to the actual number of languages there are
Yeah,
in
I
the
guess
world.
I was kind of just meaning Latin.
Yeah, oh no, Latin, you can use the same word for both very easily. You could use several words for both. My favorite is invenio, which is also where we get the word invent from in English.
Yeah, great.
It means to find or to come upon.
Oh, you know what's weird? I was just learning today in Italian, trovare is to find.
Oh,
and
yeah.
when you say that you're going to go visit with some friends,
Mm-hmm.
you say that word. You say, I'm going to go find.
Oh, you're going to go find them?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you say I'm going to find myself with them? Or do you say I'm going to find them?
I don't remember because I just learned it. But I think it was, it seemed like a just direct replacement of when we say I'm going to go visit them, you say I'm going to go trovare them. I'm going to go visit, I'm going to go find them.
Gotcha. I ask because in Spanish, when you meet someone for the first time, or if you're going to go if you meet someone on the street, say I'm walking down the street and I see someone and we meet, the way you express that in Spanish, you say, I found myself with them. So I was wondering if it was I found them or I found myself with them.
I'm pretty sure
Italian.
it was I found them.
That's That's actually, I think, more interesting to me.
Yeah, I thought so when I
Because
heard it.
what you were saying, Mike, sounds really Dante, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like he'll say, like, I found myself here doing this.
Yeah, and I wonder if that is because of classical English idiom, and every time you translate something from the 1300s, you try to sound more old than you are.
Oh, I wonder.
Or if he's following Middle Italian. Both are possibilities. In Latin, you can say, I found myself with someone. Or I found myself at a place. You can carry yourself somewhere. That's a really common way of just saying go, is to carry oneself somewhere. All kinds of stuff. So I just wonder if Middle Italian follows that. Maybe Modern Italian has gotten rid of the reflexiveness of it, which is possible. Language changes a lot.
I like that phrase that I think I've heard in like a Three Dog Night song or something about, I found myself doing this activity and I said self, you know, like,
Yes.
and I said self, what are you doing? You know,
That's fantastic. There's a prayer in the Eastern Orthodox Church where the person praying it addresses himself as, oh, my soul, comma,
yeah.
and talks
I've
to
heard of that
themselves.
before.
It's a beautiful, beautiful set of prayers. Anyway, yeah. So I don't want to go way too far in time. I have so many. There's so many things we can keep thinking about on this issue. I don't want to go super far. My sort of closing thoughts, however long they end up being, but the last sorts of questions I want to ask are things like, we're all in agreement, at least, that language in some way at some times can influence thought. I think we all agree on that. Is that good? Is that okay? Does that invalidate claims of precise knowledge? Because we all know language is radically imprecise. Like, we can talk about it. I'm taking it as a given that we all think language is radically imprecise. Reality is way, way, way more specific, and our words always scope with a level of tolerance of, either side. So when I say that door is brown, I am not remotely describing exactly what color it is. I am giving you a category that door happens to fall into, but the category is way broader. I can point to several things, call them all brown, and they're all different colors, and we're all okay with it. I can get more specific, but I often don't. In language, this is sort of an axiom of language. You tend to be as imprecise as possible all the time, because precision requires more language. More precision requires more language, and we try to say things with as little effort as possible. And so generally, if I'm trying to get my point across, I will be as imprecise as I can be without breaking understanding. So like, if I walk up to someone who's reading a book and I say, how is it? It can literally refer to any inanimate object in the universe. They know it means the book because they're holding the book. Therefore, I can be imprecise. If they were holding two things, a book and a beer, I would have to name which one I mean.
A book and a beer. You just described my Saturday nights.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
kidding.
But I wouldn't have to say, how is the logger?
That would not refer to the book.
It wouldn't refer to the book, but it's also way more precise than I have to be, and I probably wouldn't say it. I would say, how's the beer?
Yeah.
Now, if they were holding 2 beers, then I can't just say, how's the beer? I have to be more specific. And so we tend to use the level of specificity that we need. We tend to be as imprecise as possible, but as specific as necessary.
Yeah, and I think when you try to get more specific than necessary, it tends to bore people.
It comes across as weird.
Yeah, when they already figure out what it is that you're asking them in that kind of situation, the more detail you give them, the more frustrated they're going to get because they already got it. They already figured out what you're asking, so you need to stop and listen to their response.
Yeah, and when you use more specific language, because you use specific language, when there may be a to use anything less specific would cause like misunderstanding. When you use language that's more specific than necessary, people feel talked down to.
Yeah.
Because you're assuming, well, if I weren't really specific, you probably wouldn't understand what I was talking about. Like, I know what I'm talking about.
That was
but
the frustration I was referring to. That's exactly right.
It can come across as very pedantic if someone's more specific than they have to be. And the problem can come with arguing sometimes. I've had this problem sometimes where if someone's arguing something philosophically, I know a lot of philosophical technical jargon. I can speak with philosophical technical jargon to an okay degree if I want to get really specific. Or if I want to argue something, I tend to think, let's be as specific as we can be, which doesn't always work because then people feel talked down to. It kind of sounds like you're using big words to sound smart, to impose, I control this conversation because I'm smarter than you. Whereas sometimes I'm really just like, no. Here's words that I know that really, like, I know I've had this thought before. Using these words, categorizing it this way helps immediately clear something up. Sometimes it just comes across as pedantic because they haven't had that thought in those terms. And so me suddenly jumping into technical jargon sounds like I'm trying to steamroll their ideas.
I think you're doing that right now, Mike, to me. I don't know what pedantic means.
Oh, pedantic. Pedantic means inappropriately teacherly.
Okay.
Coming from the Greek word paideio, meaning to teach.
Okay.
Literally means to child-ize someone. To treat someone as a child. In Greek means to teach, because that is the action that is most properly associated with children is teaching.
So pedantic is now my most favorite vocab word of the day in a very long time.
Very good.
That was an awesome.
I do like the word
little
pedantic.
Etymology on it.
There are 2 words in Greek that are just verbs based on the noun child. One is paideio, to educate, and one is paidzo, to tease, which is very fun. Paidzo can mean to play with, to tease, or to flirt. And it's a very fun word, and it gets used really well. And there comes, I guess, my last question. Are those 3 things related? Are teasing and flirting and playing with someone, and by playing I literally mean like playing games, like throwing balls, is it okay that the Greeks had 1 word for that and regularly talked about how they're the same thing? Partly because they had 1 word for it.
I knee-jerk reaction. I think that's okay. I think flirting is teasing because it's like showing affection without any meaning for follow through. So you are teasing someone. You're toying with their emotions.
Okay.
You're playing with them.
Toying with their emotions.
So, like, imagine if... here's a fun fact.
Flirting is never serious. We wouldn't say flirting is serious.
Sure. I was just going to ask, if I made fun of you later for dropping your mic on the floor, if I teased you for that, would that be flirting?
Oh, and that's where it gets weird.
That's my question.
In the Greek?
Well, it's the same word.
Yeah.
Because it's 1 word, is it 1 concept? And even if it's not always the same concept, is it okay to, like, would you, if I teased you for dropping a microphone on the floor, would you ever construe that as me flirting with you?
No.
Why?
But I guess we have that one word discovery, even though we have an understanding of it in two very different ways.
Sure. In ancient Greece, yeah, it'd be flirty. A little bit. Maybe. That's the question. If there's one word for something, does it necessarily always contain all senses in every use? If I paizo someone in ancient Greece, am I always being a little flirty? Am I always being a little playful? And
Are you
am I
saying
always
is it always
being a
being
little teasy?
interpreted as that?
Well, in a sense, yeah.
Okay.
Like, is that or in a sense, is if I tease someone in ancient Greece, am I necessarily flirting with them because their language does not have a separate word?
Maybe their idea of flirting is broader
That
than
could
our
be.
idea.
I would argue that it is, actually. So that's a good point. Their interpretation of it would be changed. Does that mean that people who speak different native languages do not view reality the same way? In a problematic way. In a way that, like, say someone speaks, what's a language that's wildly different than English? We'll do like Hausa. Hausa is an African language. Would someone who grew up speaking English and someone who grew up speaking Hausa ever be able to communicate with each other in a meaningful way if they do not have words that correspond to things? So, or I can pick another language. There is a language in Africa that I don't remember the name of that only has 3 verbs. Do, go, come. That's it. There are no other verbs. You cannot run in that language. You have to go on a run. Run is always a noun. Would we have actual philosophical problems trying to communicate ideas?
Because the syntax of the language is so different, right? No, I mean, you would have to learn the syntax.
Okay, so I always have to... So if I'm going to communicate with someone, you would argue we have to be using the same language. I mean, I suppose, yeah. In some sense, on a practical level, you have to, because otherwise, how would you understand? But in a sense, like, would we have to agree which one to use? Do I have to use, like, are they going to be able to think in English? That's a wild... Is it a wild leap in concept to go from going on a run to running? To think of something as always a noun or always a verb? I think it's an open question.
Yeah, it's open. It doesn't seem like that big of a leap to me. I would say it would take more effort for them to learn the English language than some other language would. That's
demonstrably true.
Yeah. So,
or here's another, maybe even a better question of, oh, okay. There are languages that do not differentiate tense in their verbs. Does that mean that their experience of time is fundamentally different?
Yeah, and I've been thinking about that one recently because in Italian, they have a different way of talking about the past than in English.
Yep, they split the past up differently than we do.
Yeah, into like recent past and remote past.
And we do kind of.
Yeah,
we have ways of doing it, but we do it differently.
Yeah.
We split the past. There are some languages that have 8 different past tenses for different levels of remoteness. Something that happened just happened, something that happened earlier today, something that happened about 1 day ago, something that happened a few days ago, something that happened about a week ago, something that happened about 1 cycle of the moon ago, something that happened about a year ago, and something that happened way further back.
That's awesome.
It's fantastic.
It would take more to learn, but then
it's harder
it would
to learn
be
than English
easier to talk
in that
about
sense.
things.
It's more specific to talk about things.
Yeah.
Imagine not knowing when something happened and then having to describe it as having happened at some time.
Oh, that makes it hard.
Well, you have to pick one.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, they're going to have words for around this time, or they're going to have ways of dealing with that, but it does require you to do more.
Yeah.
Then
Well, we do
in
that
English,
too.
you can just say, it happened sometime. so easy.
Oh, there's no way to do that in the other language.
No, you must pick. Did it happen just now?
Okay.
This day, a week? Like, you have to
So I
pick
was
one
saying,
of those.
there's been plenty
no
of times
general.
where I say a couple of weeks ago, and then I think about it, it's like, no, it's really more like over a month.
Sure.
You know? So
yeah.
I used the wrong one.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to use anything.
Correct. In their language, you must always pick. There are some languages where you have to always indicate on every single verb how you found out this knowledge, whether you actually saw it happen with your own eyes, whether you heard about it from someone, whether you heard it happen, whether or not the person you found out from is a trustworthy source, whether you just used like there are some languages, it's called there's a word for it that I can't think of right now, but I'll think of it here in a second, where you have to specify that on every single verb, how you found out this knowledge.
Wow.
Yeah. And the fact that I can't think of what it's called is really annoying me. That's too bad. I'll think about it right after we click stop recording. Evidentiality. It's called evidentiality.
Oh, evidence, yeah. Okay.
Yep. Most languages don't distinguish between more than 2 or 3 of them, but some languages can have 8 different evidentiality markers for 8 different ways of coming to knowledge. You must specify on every single verb how you came to it. We can use evidentiality in English, but it's not marked on the verb. I can say something like the doorbell rings and I say, oh, that must be Eric. What I'm expressing is I didn't see that it's Eric, but something has happened that has caused me to believe that Eric is standing outside the door. I've sort of hedged my bets. Some languages you do that with every single verb.
That's interesting. That must be Eric. Is that the same use of the word must when you command someone? You must do this?
Yes, it's technically an expansion of that use.
Okay.
As in logically necessary.
Okay.
It's a shortening of the sentence of... Basically, it's a shortening of the syllogism. Eric is going to be ringing the doorbell. The doorbell has just rung. Therefore, it must be Eric who has just rung the doorbell. Like, that's what you're basically saying.
Yeah.
Except no one would ever say all of those sentences without being pedantic.
Fair enough.
Because if I ever expressed it with that much specificity, everyone in the room would be like, we know how thinking works. Oh my gosh.
But here at the shed...
Open the door.
Here at the shed, though, I would kind of appreciate the spelling out of the logic.
Sure, because it would be banter. It would be friendly. Now, and that's another thing. Pedantry can be teasing. And
Mike,
if it's teasing is always teasing in the Greek sense of paizo almost always refers to something well received.
I'd appreciate it if you'd stop flirting with me right now.
You sound like me in my Greek class. Shout out to my Greek teacher. We would do stuff all the time because the word to teach means to flirt or to tease. Kind of. They're related.
Yeah.
Paideo, paizo.
Yeah.
They both mean to treat as a child, which is wildly interesting if you think of flirting means to treat someone the way you would treat a child.
And if you think
I didn't
about
really
it,
think
makes
about
sense.
it that way before.
Yeah.
Right. Well, think about if you have a boyfriend or girlfriend, someone calls them baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that a wildly horrifying thing to call someone that you consider a love
I know
interest?
some people that have a big problem with that kind of
I
language.
know, it's interesting. And that leads to the, that's one of the questions of, well, if you call them a baby, does that mean that you think of them as a baby in certain ways? Do you actually consider them? And is the way you treat them related to the way you actually treat infants? Is there crossover there? I would answer, generally speaking, in that situation, no. I don't think the average person...
You're using that word in a different way. You're using it in an endearing way.
Yeah. You're
and
using
not
it
in an actual way.
Yeah. But then, why?
Why
that word?
Yeah.
Why baby? Like, it's just so weird.
Yeah.
Or like when a grandma says, oh, you're so cute, I could just eat you up. Whoa, what a wildly threatening thing to say.
You don't know me like that.
Yeah, like what in the world? Sometimes language is so wild and different. And this is why my sort of concluding thought is something like, language 100% can influence thought. Thought 100% can just determine language. You can think in terms separate from language, and then shape language to express what you're saying. Sometimes language and thought don't match up at all. When someone says, I could eat you up, they do not mean at all in any way, shape, or form actual cannibalism. They're expressing something. They're expressing an idea that is 100% devoid of the meaning of those words.
It was an idiom.
Yeah, an idiom. Something where the semantics and the pragmatics do not line up.
Yeah.
Different things like that. I do think it's possible to have language determine thought, but I think that's almost always problematic. I think that's where you get into things like over-etymologizing words. Say someone's reading an ancient text, or say someone's speaking English, and someone uses a big fancy word that has Greek roots or whatever, and someone goes, actually, that word comes from the Greek word meaning to set forests on fire, and I would appreciate it if you didn't advocate destruction of the ecosystem. And they're like, the word means that I disagree with you. And they're like, I feel threatened by your violence. That word does not actually mean to disagree. If you knew the Greek roots, you would know that it means to set trees on fire or something. Like, that's someone who is claiming that language determines thought.
Yeah.
In a problematic way. Because what they're doing is now they are not allowing communication to happen. They are pedantically insisting that language determines thought in an unhelpful way.
Yeah. He is not pushing up daisies, he is dead.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. The insistence that the use of a word, that a word's meaning can never change. For all of history, a word has a set meaning that it always means, is just silly, because it's just not true. Yeah. And to insist upon it is to enslave your thoughts to words in an inappropriate way. So, yeah.
Well, there you have it. This is one of our open-ended ones that has an open-ended ending to it, too. How long have we been running? Too long. We said we want to do 30-minute episodes if we can, but this is...
Wow, yeah, this one's not even close to that.
That's okay. I'll edit it way down.
Or not don't. Really, just have a 3-hour episode.
I won't, because I can't cut things out.
Yeah, all of this was very, very, this was one long discussion.
We did a better job of staying on topic than usually. So.
That's true. We did talk about one topic for the entire time.
That's great. Yeah, we can hang our hat on that. Good. All right. You can email us at deepthoughtsontheRocks@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.